My name's Paul, I'm from CTI Digital. That's all of us up there, or at least most of us. This is a talk about the Magento cache. And in particular, we're going to talk about how we approach caching at CTI, just at quite a high level, and then go into a bit of depth about a particular configuration cache issue that we had, and then ultimately how we fixed it. So the purpose of a cache is to take a repetitive step and store its output so that we can use it again later. Now Magento, as you all know, comes with quite a lot of its own caches. The main ones you'll probably use on a day-to-day basis are the block cache, the layout cache, and the configuration. Out of those, only really the block cache will help you on the front-end side of things. You've got to really build it into your own block templates and block modules as well to take full benefit of it. If you're using Magento Enterprise, or you've got an equivalent on Community Edition, you'll also have full page cache, and you're going to see quite big improvements in your page load time if you start using that, really. Moving away from Magento, you might choose to use an opcode cache. So because PHP is an interpreted language, that gets compiled to bytecode when it's run. Something like APC cache will store that output of the bytecode, and then next time you use it, you don't have to go through that whole process again. On the database side as well, you may choose to optimize your query cache. So in much the same way that APC cache works, that will take a prepared statement and then store the output for future use. Now, it's a bit of a challenge, but if you really want to get good performance, then you probably have to look at something like Varnish, particularly on a high traffic server. And if something is in Varnish cache, it doesn't actually have to hit PHP at all, so you can get really huge savings in the amount of time that your application is spending processing things. However, VCL, which is the language Varnish uses to control everything, requires knowledge of C, and it's quite a lot more knowledge than the typical Magento developer is going to have available, but you really need that for total control. Ultimately, the main aim of these is to stop us hitting Magento, because that's where everything starts to slow down. As well as your cache, you've got to think about your cache storage. So if you just install Magento out of the box, you're going to be using a file-based cache. Now, for most small to medium-sized stores, that's probably not going to be a problem, but pretty soon you'll hit performance limits with trying to traverse and read and write information to that file-based cache. In particular as well, if you need multiple web servers, as a lot of sites do now, you're going to need to centralize that cache. You could choose to stick it in the database. I wouldn't, because that's just a bad idea, really. So at CTI, we tend to use Redis, but you could also use Memcache. And this will allow all the different servers to share that same cache. The cache is in memory as well, so it's really good for performance. Now, while caching is never a solution to poor performance, it is necessary for it to be there, particularly Magento's own caches. And the one that I mentioned I want to talk about today is the configuration cache. Now, the configuration cache will combine all of the XML files, and there's one or two in Magento, and make one giant file. It will then take your system configuration values and put them into that big file, and then store it. Now, in the Enterprise 1.14 out the box, that's around 730 kilobytes in size, which is pretty big to start with, to be honest. Every time you add a new module, though, obviously that is going to increase, and depending on the module, that can vary, really. Just as an example, the SagePay module, which we tend to use on quite a lot of projects, will add around 17K of size to your configuration cache. Now, that really isn't that much on its own. Now, I think one of Magento's best features is its multi-site capability. It lets us run multiple websites, different brands, different languages, whatever it may be, off a single installation. So from a maintenance point of view, it's great for us. However, when you add a new website, you increase the size of the configuration cache. And that's because it will take a copy of all your system configuration values and store them in a new node just for that particular website. Now again, looking at Magento 1.14 out of the box, for every new website you add, it'll add around 125 kilobytes onto that size. So you can start seeing how it can start growing. And obviously, as you add more modules and you've got more websites, that can really multiply. And you can end up with a pretty big configuration cache. So, we working with a client, they had 9 websites on one install, which is a bit more than a lot, but I still think it's quite a sensible amount. And the site had been running for a couple of months and performance was absolutely fine. Now, this particular client is very seasonal, and they're also a bit old school in how they market. They send out a physical catalogue to their customers. and they just launched a new catalogue, so there's a lot higher traffic on the website. Now, in terms of the site structure, when we had a look, there's about 70 additional modules, which sounds a lot actually. I was a bit surprised. But a lot of them are just custom ones, just for small bits of functionality, but of course there was also a few third-party modules in there. Now, a cache is going to get cleared whether you like it or not. And your site really does have to be able to cope with things when the caches are cleared. It's not ideal, but it's got to be able to do it. However, the client phoned us and said they'd cleared all the caches out and took the site down, which obviously the busiest time of the year. Not great. Looking at the configuration cache size, their particular cache was 3.5 meg in size, so you can see how much it's grown, particularly through the amount of websites that they had. Speaking of which, that particular client isn't the biggest one in terms of size. We've got an enterprise install that's got 180 websites on there, so you can imagine what that's like. The config file size for that was 47 meg, so it shows how much it can kind of grow out of control, really. So why is it happening? Why, when you clear the configuration cache, is the site going down? Well, every time the configuration cache is cleared out, the first request that comes in will start off the process, as you would expect. However, while that cache is being generated, any other requests that come in will also kick off that same cache creation process. And what you end up with is the CPU load is getting increased because that's a big file to process, and all the XML files are across the disk. It's got to merge them all together. So ultimately, if you get lots of requests kicking off the same process, your CPU load's going to go up, your site's going to start slowing down. It's even worse if you get low on memory, because then you might start going into swap and you're pretty much at a reboot Nginx or whatever server technology you happen to use. Now, the CPU load is really an indication of how much activity is going on a particular box. If it's at 0, that obviously indicates that there's nothing going on, but it also indicates that the next request that comes in, there's going to be no backlog in terms of it getting processed. As that number goes up, that obviously indicates more activity, but if you take a single CPU core, while it's at 1 or less on its CPU load, it's not at capacity. Next request that comes in gets handled straight away. As soon as you start going over that threshold, and ideally it's about 70% of your capacity, I believe. I'm not sysadmin, so don't quote me on that one. But as soon as it starts getting over that, you should start to worry, because once you get over your maximum CPU load, you're going to have to step in and do something. Now, this is a particular bit of code within Magento that kicks it off. It's in Mage core model app, the init modules function. You can see it checks if there's a modules cache. If not, it goes in and tries to load the modules. So there's no barrier there. If it can't find the cache, every request is going to kick off that creation. And this is just an indication on a graph. Across the bottom, we've got time in 10-second intervals. Up the left, we've got the CPU load. The red line indicates when we clear the cache. And you can see that how much it can spike. Obviously, it depends on how long it takes for your configuration cache to build and how much traffic you've got, but that could keep going up and up. It depends on your situation, really. So, how did we solve this? Well, first of all, it's always important to have a cache policy in place with your client. And this is really about educating your client about what will happen if you clear the cache. This was their peak time. You don't clear the cache, unfortunately. So it's really about showing them the effects of what happens if you're going to do that. And to be honest, that actually solved it for this particular client. We told them, don't make config changes. I don't know what you're doing in there anyway, but don't do anything. But if you are going to do something, wait till it's a bit quieter, and they'll be able to handle it. However, I've never liked the idea that it could actually still go down if they really need to change something. You've got deployments going on as well. You're going to have to clear the config cache at some point. So we've created a module for this. When we first found the issue, we were obviously Googling around. There isn't an awful lot out there on this particular subject. We found one guy who'd made his own cache module, and he'd actually rolled in a very similar fix to what we've done. We probably would have gone with that, but it would have meant switching to Varnish and switching our whole cache implementation, which was considered quite risky, I think. So we left that alone and made our own module. So the way the module works is it creates a cache lock before it actually goes off and creates the cache. And this keeps the the cache creation process to just one single request. The module allows you to configure a maximum amount of retry attempts, which we'll go through in a minute, and the amount of time to wait between retrying. What this ultimately means is that because the cache generation is kept to one request, the strain on the server is a lot less. You'll get a slight delay on the front end while it's building if it takes a long time, but then ultimately everything will be able to pick up again and carry on. The module does require the Redis cache module, but that's been bundled with Magento now for a couple of years, I think, and it's pretty easy to download it if you need it. So to activate the module, there's a little XML bit that you can put into your local XML. First of all, just enable, disable. If you don't like it, you want to get rid of it, whatever. The next lot is your Redis connection details. The key is the value that we store within the Redis database to indicate that the lock's in place. And then max attempts and retry time are configurable values that you can say, the cache is being created, I want to wait so long, and I want to retry this process so many times. And after each reattempt, it will check if the cache exists. By default, that's set to be 10 attempts every 10 seconds in microseconds, which is far too long for most people. But given that this amount of time is going to vary depending on your entire setup, how complex your website is, you'll need to be able to configure those particular values. From the code side, we've had to create a local override of Mage call model app. Unfortunately, because of how it's instantiated, the typical rewrites or observers aren't available at that point in time, so it's not an ideal solution, but it's something that if you did have to put into your site, I think would have to be a considered step anyway. So you're going to be fully aware of if you've already overridden Mage call model app at a local level already. Within that, we have a new function in there, which is init modules with lock-in. So if the cache doesn't need recreating, it'll return, everything's fine. If it does need to be recreated, and I've cut out a bit of code here so it'll fit, it'll first check if there's a cache lock in place. If there's not, it will then create its own cache lock and kick off the load modules function. After it's done, it'll release the cache, return. If a request comes in while the cache lock's in place, then it goes into that loop at the bottom. And using the values that you specified in local XML, that will retry so many times and wait so long between each attempt. If it finds the module cache is available, then it'll return. If it gets out of that loop, it's gone past its max attempts, then it'll just go to the 503 maintenance page. Your customer will refresh the page and hopefully it's there by then. So this is an indication of what it's like with the cache lock and without the cache lock. So again, the red line indicates the point at which we cleared the cache, and you can see that it stays pretty stable, to be honest, even when we've cleared it under the same amount of traffic. There was also an unexpected extra with the way that we approach this change, really. So if any of you have been involved with deploying code to a live server, you'll know one of the risks is that your module updates setup script could run twice, and that could be pretty annoying, really. There's many deployment strategies that you can use to get around this, whether you put it in maintenance mode or you disable local XML, apply module updates, and then trigger it off by a script. You can do that. However, because of where the module updates get run, it's actually inside our cache lock function, so only the first request will clear the cache, run the module updates. No one else is going to trigger that off. If you're interested in finding out more about the configuration cache, Storm, of course, has done a really good article about it, and there's quite a lot of intricacies to it, and it's before we really had this issue, it's not something I really delved into, but it's worth a bit of a read if you're at all interested. Thank you very much.